Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for standing by and for joining us today's session in the ReadyTalk Web Seminar Series. My name is Simone. I work here at ReadyTalk, and I will be moderating today's call along with our presenter for this afternoon, Hal Adler. Just a bit of a background on the ReadyTalk Web Seminar Series. We put today's seminar together and the series basically with the purpose of building a community where you are able to interact with a variety of experts on a number of topics, hopefully to enhance your organization's success and also your own personal development as well. Today's seminar is entitled The 5 Attributes of Great Leaders, Unleashing the Mentor in New Managers and Leaders, again presented by Hal Adler, who is back to join us for I'm not even sure what number of time this is, but we love having him back on his series. He gives us a lot of great insight. During today's presentation, again, all participants are in a listen-only mode, but we definitely encourage you to answer your questions or send your comments to me through the chat feature, which is located at the lower left-hand portion of your screen. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about ReadyTalk after today's session, just remain on the line for a few moments, and we'll give you kind of a rundown of what we can do to contact you or give you a little bit more information about our services and what we do and how it might be beneficial to your organization as well. Today's session is also being recorded Tuesday, September 22nd, and I'll just give you a quick background about Hal, and then I'll let him take away the presentation. Prior to starting Leadership Landing, Hal was president of the Great Places to Work Institute, a global research and consulting firm best known for creating the annual Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For. Hal joined the Institute in 2004 as a consultant, and then in 2006 was asked to be president of the company. And on that note, I'm going to let him finish up with his bio and then get on with today's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Simone. And good morning if you're on the West Coast like me, and good afternoon to everybody else. Thank you so much for making the time to join us for this presentation. As I look across the attendee list and recognize that over 100 people registered for this webcast, it really excites me to see so many people interested in developing their leadership skills and really pushing themselves to be the best they can be. Today we'll talk about mentoring and coaching and how mentoring and coaching can increase performance across teams, and look at that specifically through the lens of great leadership and great workplaces and the 5 attributes of great leaders. So off we go. After several years of working with hundreds of outstanding companies and leaders and those on the path to really becoming great, I recognized that the standout leaders, the ones that were really able to establish the highest functioning work teams and the most solid relationships, had some specific behaviors and attitudes in common. And after leaving Great Place to Work Institute, I started to research and learn more about these leaders, their impact, and their companies. The result of that work and research is Leadership Landing and the 5 attributes of great leaders. Just a bit about the company. Leadership Landing is an executive coaching and consulting firm with products and services designed specifically around supporting leaders to be at their best. And it's my hope that by defining or demystifying great leadership as it relates to great workplaces, coaching and mentoring, and the 5 attributes, it can help you to think a little bit differently about the challenges ahead. So here's what we're going to cover as we move into the next 55 minutes or so. We'll look at coaching and mentoring and talk about the incredibly positive impact that relatively simple behavioral changes can create. We'll look at the business case and the relationship that coaching and mentoring has to promotions, retention, and employee engagement. And then we'll actually deconstruct some coaching behaviors that I think you'll get excited about. Lastly, we'll look at the 5 attributes of great leaders as a lens for you to look through as you consider how to enact some of the change and some of the behaviors we're talking about. If you've ever heard me present, you'll know that I talk a lot about transcending the what to do and moving into the how to do it as one of the differentiators between good places and great places to work. This principle certainly applies to what we'll be talking about here, and we'll talk more about it as we get a little bit further along. Please do take a moment and capture any questions that you have along the way in the chat box you find on the lower left-hand side of your screen. I'll try to keep an eye on that, and I'm sure Simone can help me to keep an eye on that. And if we get questions along the way, I'd be very happy to stop and take them. The learning environment is all that much more rich when we have some participation. So if you do have a question along the way, best to just capture it, throw it down, and I'll stop and address it. The other thing I'll mention is we will have some time at the end for question and answer. So if you think of a question and it's not till the end, or you want to ask it toward the end, we can do that instead. So before we get too far into this, I want to get a very simple but incredibly important question out of the way, and that is, why bother? Why coaching and mentoring? You've got so much on your plate. This presentation was originally geared toward new managers and new leaders and those new in the role. Certainly having to worry about coaching and mentoring now as you've got new responsibilities, as you've got new tasks and a new breadth of responsibility, why coaching and mentoring? Well, I think it's important to address this, and why worry about this extra thing? It's probably nowhere in your job description to be a coach mentor, unless you're in an enlightened organization that really gets this. Among the 100 best, for instance, there's SC Johnson and Adobe that measure managers not just on what they achieve, but how they achieve it, and look at coaching behaviors and mentor behaviors as a characteristic of how they achieve it. But regardless of that, you've got a very long list of immediate and new responsibilities and tasks. Why in the world should you make headspace for a nice-to-have like coaching and mentoring? Let's look at some specific findings related to the subject. Diversity Inc. magazine reports that when surveying employees within the Black, Asian, and Latina community, 48% cite not having an influential mentor or sponsor as the greatest barrier to success. 48% cite not having an influential mentor or sponsor as the greatest barrier to success. Add to that, the University of Pennsylvania tells us that in studying over 1,000 employees in a large technology firm over a 5-year period, the research showed that mentees and mentors alike were 6 times more likely to be promoted than their peers. In other words, those involved in a mentoring program, either as a mentee or a mentor, were both 6 times more likely to be promoted than their peers. Additionally, mentors and mentees had a retention rate over the 5-year period of 72% compared to 49% of those not involved. Retention rate was 72% over that 5-year period compared to 49% for those not involved in the mentor program. Add to that some more data that comes to us from the St. Charles Group in Chicago. Their research shows that across multiple organizations, mentees and mentors see on average a 40% increase on performance evaluations compared to peers. So again, those involved in a mentor program as a mentee or a mentor on average see a 40% increase on performance evaluations compared to peers not involved in the program. So you see performance immediately impacted, not just for those being mentored, but also those participating as a mentor. So not only does it build trust in an organization, and it certainly does, it feels like the right thing to do, it's actually good for business. Now, what are we really talking about here? We throw the words coaching or mentoring around fairly liberally, and it can mean a lot of different things. Here's a working definition of what a coach mentor does and really what it's all about. And before I read this, I'll mention that everyone on the call will have the PowerPoint sent to them, will have the deck sent to them, so no need to wildly scribble here to get this definition down. The whole deck will be sent to you immediately after the call, within just a few minutes after the call. So here's one of many definitions out there, and some would argue that coaching and mentoring are 2 different things. There's no rule book that anyone's playing out of here, so this is certainly up to interpretation. Throughout the presentation, though, we'll work within the context of this definition. Coach mentor is a manager who builds the team by actively listening, encouraging, and supporting members. A coach mentor develops the entire person within the context of the formal and informal rules of the organization, leads the way while creating space for each team member to find the leader within themselves. And that certainly says a lot within 2 sentences. I encourage you to go over and read that. Those words are very carefully chosen. It is, I'll say it, it is my working definition of what a coach mentor is and the purpose and the goal of being a coach mentor. I'll add that it should feel easy and natural to those involved in the process. This isn't something that should feel strained or isn't something that should at all feel like there's a massive effort going out to make it happen. Certainly there is no lack of organizations that employ formal coaching and mentoring programs, and that's really great. The key, though, is that formal and institutionalized or not, it is that the best coach-mentor relationships are relaxed, easy, and quite natural. Because the coach-mentor focuses not just on the goals or the tasks identified by the program, but on the relationship and building trust. The single most important element in a high-functioning coach-mentor relationship is trust. Think about it. Can you imagine the limitations if you had a coach-mentor that you simply did not trust? And clearly you'd be better off without it. But when it's working, however, when you can build mutual trust and connect with people around their personal and professional goals, and this is key, as they relate to the goals of the team, the department, and the organization, truly amazing things can happen. There are a number of case studies and ROI research that show us the effect that coaching and mentoring have, leading to higher engagement, better communication, and better teamwork, some of which I just spoke to a few minutes ago. So what's going on in a couple of organizations out there? And I mentioned that great companies, best companies, have transcended the what to do and moved into the how to do it. There are lots of coaching and mentoring programs out there. I mean, truly a great many of them. And there are a number that stand apart that you look at and say, well, that's a great program. And when you really peel the onion, you begin to see that it's not the nuts and bolts of the program that makes it great. It's the how. It's the how people are engaged in the process. It's the how it's implemented throughout the organization. It's the how it aligns with the special and unique, or the culture of what makes that organization tick, that makes it great. There are plenty of organizations that manage this deliberately and have it hardwired into the organization, and you can find best practices from companies like American Express, for instance. They put out some very strong programming, in particular to new hire mentors. Clearly, an employee's first weeks and months are the most critical, so Amex established a new hire mentoring program to be sure that every new hire gets the added benefit of a mentor as they're onboarded. And this is what works for them. This is what builds their people inside. IBM also has a very strong mentoring program as well. They've identified that by breaking down mentors into specific categories, this is very interesting, expert mentors, career mentors, and social mentors. Expert mentors, those that can help around the tactical know-how of a particular role or set of responsibilities. Career mentors, those that can help around finding success in the organization and establishing a career ladder that one can climb. And social mentors, those that help employees network, meet people, and learn the informal rules of the culture. At IBM, you'll find people that belong to any one of those three groups as mentors, or you'll find people that straddle and perhaps are mentors in two or perhaps three of those, but they specifically outline the goals of each mentor program to drive the program through the organization. It's very well thought out. You know, perhaps for some organizations too well thought out, but for them this works. What we're talking about here, though, is how you, a leader, a manager, whether officially designated a coach mentor or not, can infuse your style with some of these principles, some of these trust-building principles. I'm not asking you to change what you do. You already know what to do. I'm instead encouraging you to think differently about how you do this. Now, this may not be fair, but it's a fact that has probably not been shared with you before. The things you did to stand out in your role prior to this new leadership role, if you're in one, are not the things that will make you successful in this new role, right? The things that you did to stand out and be successful in your new role and be promoted into a new leadership position are not the things that will make you successful in this role. In other words, what got you here will not bring you to the next level. Now you've got to think about the how. I want to take a moment here to introduce an important model to you that addresses specifically the how, right? These are characteristics. These are attitudes and behaviors that underpin great leadership and are the 5 attributes of great leaders. As I mentioned, these are the things that differentiate great leaders from good leaders. These are the 5 attributes of great leaders. And we'll take a closer look in a few minutes, but I want to introduce them here because they clearly define the how. Again, the behaviors and characteristics that underpin great leadership and when mastered can catapult seemingly common practices and policies into best practices. It's not the town hall in an organization that's a best or great practice. It's the way the presenter communicates and sets the mood for open and honest dialogue, right? It's not the what, it's the how. Okay? It's not the training programs in the organization that makes an organization great. It's the way they seem to meet the needs of people in your organization exactly where they are in their development journeys, and the way your managers support and encourage people throughout the company to stretch and develop. Yes? Again, it's not the what but the how. It's not the tactical brilliance behind the mentoring plan that will make it stick. It's the quality of the culture, the depth of the values, and the commitment of your leaders that will make it work. Get it? Okay, so a moment on leadership. Here are the 5 attributes themselves, the qualities that leadership landing research suggests differentiate great leaders from the rest. Self-awareness. Self-awareness. A leader that drives with a clear sense of identity, a clear sense of purpose, and a distinct, consistent way of interacting with others. Bravery. One that's willing to take measured risk based on data and personal beliefs for the betterment of the organization and or the people in it. Kindness. One that exhibits and can receive empathy and compassion and integrates the needs of the business with the needs of team members and colleagues. Innovation, a leader that brings a creative, daring, and this is the key word that brings it all together, and productive approach to solving organizational challenges. Being creative and daring isn't necessarily enough, and certainly isn't innovative. Wrapping it in a productive package in a way that solves organizational challenges is what makes innovation. And lastly, inspiring, one that shares excitement and enthusiasm for the organization's vision in a way that unites and aligns people. Okay? Through this presentation, we're going to have enough time to look at the first 3 with a little more depth, and we'll do that in just a few minutes. All right? So now, how about some tactical advice that I can give you as a new leader in an organization? And these are principles that I paraphrase from an established project management methodology called Scrum or Agile Coaching. But I think they offer a tremendous amount of insight into what it means to be a coach mentor and, in fact, I believe, a great leader. So these are behaviors and these are suggestions and things that I would encourage you to think about that won't just help you to become a good coach mentor, but, in fact, a good leader. First one, be detached from the outcome. Okay, perhaps very Buddhist, yes? And perhaps the opposite of what you've heard up until today about management and leadership. But being detached from the outcome doesn't mean you don't care or aren't engaged. It does mean, however, that you focus on the how your team functions as opposed to what they are doing in order to achieve a certain goal. Yes? I mean, in management nomenclature, it's micromanaging, yes, or it's building autonomy. Yeah? But in behavioral terms, it's being detached from an outcome. Again, it doesn't mean you don't care or aren't engaged. What it means is that you focus on how the team interacts, how the team functions as a team, as opposed to what. This is yet another example of moving from the what into the how. Your detaching from the outcome allows them the space to attach. Your detaching from the outcome allows your team members the space to attach, which is what you want. You're just creating space. Let the team figure it out. It's time to let go of the idea that you have all the answers. It's a tremendous burden. It's a tremendous responsibility to carry. And no one tells you along the way that the more senior you get, the less important it becomes to have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers. In fact, a well-put I don't know builds a whole lot more credibility than making something up as you go or flubbing it along the way. It's time to relish in the notion that you're building and developing your team to the extent that they can figure it out. Your success no longer depends on your individual goals and your individual success. Your success now depends on the success of your team. Welcome to management. Welcome to leadership. It's no longer about you. It's less about you than it ever was. The more successful your team, the more successful you are. And again, relish in the notion that their development requires them to have to figure it out. And again, this creates space for you to lead. It creates buy-in and engagement along the way. Reflect back to the team constantly. Again, you don't need to be the smartest person on the team. You're probably not anyway. That's the truth of the matter. You're probably not anyway. But by going to the team, going to the people in the organization or on the team that are closest to the work for coming up with solutions to challenges just makes more sense. Recognize that your team is made up of people that have brilliance in them. Your job now is to help let that brilliance out. Again, your job is no longer to be the most brilliant in the room. Your job now as a new leader, as a new manager in an organization, is to allow people on your team to be brilliant. Your job is to unlock that brilliance inside of them. Speak body language. Get very, very clear about what you're saying, not just within your words, but probably more important within your body and face. How much space are you creating for people to create as you react to them with to their ideas with your facial expressions and body language? Just think about that for a minute in a meeting, how you react when you're experiencing things that you believe are positive or on the right track versus how you react when you're experiencing things that are off base. Do you wince? Do you raise an eyebrow? Do you shrug? Do you pull your body back? All of that speaks volumes to your experience of people in the room, and the bigger your reaction, the less space you create for people to be themselves and take space within the organization. And recognize this, that you are being watched more than you've ever been watched before. People on your team are watching everything you do, from an email to a voicemail to how you show up at a meeting to how you react facially or through body language. They're watching everything you do and looking for signs and signals and symbols for how they're doing within the organization. It is a big responsibility, but this can be a wake-up call. You are being watched. You are being watched. And don't forget that. It's not just about what you say. It's about how you show up in that room. Let there be silence. Be okay with uncomfortable silence in team meetings and discussions. Remember here that your job is to create space so that they can fill it, not just to fill every crevice with what you know or what you think you know. Be unreasonable, right? This is help people understand that there are no ideas that are dumb or stupid, and model innovation and creativity. Certainly there's a time for action and there's a time for ideas. And I'm not suggesting that every idea, regardless of how outlandish, needs to be explored before action can be taken. But there's a time for idea generation and a time for action. When it's time for idea generation, there should be no dumb or stupid ideas, and your job now becomes to model innovation and creativity in a way that helps them understand it's okay to be unreasonable if it gets you where you need to go. Lastly, embrace failure and celebrate growth. Opposite sides of the same coin. What we're really talking about here is celebrating the development journey that everyone here is on. Sometimes things work and success is easy to celebrate, but when we're taking risks and pushing ourselves, sometimes things don't work as planned. In fact, if nothing gets dropped, if no mistakes are made, if things always work out to plan, you can venture a guess that you are not pushing yourself or taking enough risks to be innovative. And if innovation is part of the way things work in your organization, or innovation is the way it should be working in parts of your organization, then you've got to make mistakes along the way. And it becomes incredibly important then to recognize mistakes as a part of the cycle, as a part of getting work done and coming up with new ideas. One of the best ways I've seen managers celebrate success comes from Intuit, the software software company in Silicon Valley. When something goes wrong in Intuit, they can identify the learnings from the mistake. They can identify the takeaways, and it can improve their process. They celebrate those learnings in what they call failure celebrations. And the most important part of the failure celebration is recognizing the mistake itself and offering encouragement to the team or to the group or to the employee or employees that were part of the mistake, again, as a part of a development journey. It's never going to go perfectly well all the time, but really when we see the differentiation and we think about your role as a new leader in all of this, what do we think about here? Given the number, one reason new managers fail is the inability to make this what to how transition. In other words, the research shows the inability to let go of the details, right? And I spun that in leadership landing language, going from the what to the how. Here are some ideas, a couple of from-tos that I think can be helpful. Managers to coach mentors, or managers to leaders. Managers focus on individual contribution. Coach mentors focus on the success of the team. A manager has all the answers. A coach mentor facilitates the team to generate answers. Managers drive towards specific outcomes. Coach mentors are invested in overall performance, always the big picture in mind. Managers leads the team. Coach mentors, the team leads itself. Manager steers, coach mentor guides. Now, it's not to say that in a perfect world you will always be far right. I'm not suggesting you will always be on the far right of this table, but I am suggesting there are elements to both of these that can help a leader integrate what needs to happen with the mentality, with the behavior, with the attitude, with the characteristics of great leaders, with the characteristics of coach mentors. And if you believe based on your leadership style, you sit there on the left, I would encourage you to look at this and think about what parts can you tweak, what parts can you invest in, what parts can you consider that will infuse some of this coach-mentor mentality in it. Now, it's not going to work every time, and certainly there are some factors, things that are going on at the end of the day. For some of us, this works, and some of it doesn't work. The real differentiators between success and failure that I've seen come down to three specific things. One, support from the organization. If you don't have support from your immediate manager, or the culture of the organization gets in the way of you informing your style with elements of coach mentoring, then this is a challenge. What I've seen, though, is that the vast majority of companies that don't have any formal process in place still recognize the value of coach mentors, and while not perhaps proactively driving programs as these, they certainly won't stand in the way of the individual managers growing and developing in this direction. Certainly, everyone has to want this for themselves. They've got to have the intent to be a great coach mentor. The intention needs to be there. In my experience, many that think they're ready actually are not quite as ready as they think to let go of some things, to let go of control, to let go of some of the holding on that we're talking about here. But once they're really ready, this kind of thing can happen very quickly. And lastly, it helps to have an understanding of what great leadership is all about. And I want to talk a little bit now about great leadership and some of the standout, again, behaviors and characteristics among great leaders. So you'll remember that Leadership Landing defines great leadership as self-awareness, bravery, kindness, innovation, and inspiration. Let's focus on three of these for the moment: self-awareness, bravery, and kindness. And again, as I read before, self-awareness is seen in one that leads with a clear sense of identity, a clear sense of purpose, and a distinct, consistent way of interacting with others. A couple of examples here. Business Week reported in 2002 that Henry McKinnell, the CEO of Pfizer, big drug company, was so bought into professional development that when the results of his own 360 came in, he posted them on the company intranet for everyone to see. Complete with strengths and trouble spots, he was so clear about what was important to him, going back to this definition of self-awareness, right, this sense of purpose, that he believed it prudent to widely share the results of his 360. This could have easily been seen as a bravery best practice too, but what drove his behavior was more modeling self-awareness. Now, the backstory here is that Pfizer didn't have a 360 process in place for leaders, and McKinnell thought that it would help leadership to develop, to really understand what peers, direct reports, bosses thought of them in terms of how they were showing up at work. So he, before putting a mandate down and before even suggesting that his team, his direct reports, engage in the process, he was actually the first to do it. He went out and had a 360 done on himself. But before he turned to his leadership team and said, "Your turn," he again posted the results of his 360 across the company for everyone to see. Now, he didn't stop there. He also posted his strengths, his opportunities, and his action plan. So it allowed him it created a sense of transparency and a sense of urgency for when he turned to his leadership team and said, your turn. It sent an entirely different message, clearly illustrating a sense of self, a clarity of a sense of purpose, and a consistency of interacting with others in a great example. So Medtronic has another great story to tell. Bill George was at the helm, a CEO, driving market cap in his tenure from $1 to $60 billion. At this point, George is retired and is teaching management theory and management practice at Harvard Business School. He's a professor of management at Harvard Business School. But the point is, his success mainly came from staying true to the purpose of the company without faltering. And again, from a place of self, from a place of consistency and sense of purpose. Medtronic was so committed to healing patients, not to creating shareholder value, that no matter how large the company got, they stayed true to that purpose. Bill George has literally been quoted as saying, we are not in business to maximize shareholder value. Recognize that Medtronic is a publicly held company. And for the CEO of a publicly held company to stand up and say, we are not in business to maximize shareholder value, sends an entirely different message about consistency, sense of purpose, vision, and mission of an organization. But it was by staying extremely clear about that personal and organizational sense of purpose that attitude worked to the advantage of the company in some very clear and measurable ways. It's worth mentioning that Bill George is also an outspoken proponent of meditation and mind-body awareness and talks openly about how meditation provides him with energy, creativity, and calm. Introducing meditation to work in order to exercise calm and consciousness is gaining significant popularity across a number of organizations. And in general, there's been an interesting trend in integrating alternative training and support methods aimed at developing self-awareness and other elements of the full person. And you can find things like meditation training at Google, Apple, Yahoo, AstraZeneca, IBM, 3Com, Texas Instruments, Raytheon, Medtronic, obviously, Nokia, and those are just the recognized brands that introduce meditation training to, again, help people develop that self-awareness, that full sense of self. Bravery now, as we move to the next piece, is the willingness to take measured risk based on data and personal beliefs for the betterment of the organization and or the people in it. Whole Foods has a very interesting story to tell, and it revolves around this practice called salary disclosure. To make a long story short, and I think everyone on the call knows Whole Foods or has been in a Whole Foods, it's an upscale grocer, lots of organic and health-oriented, a big homeopathic and alternative healing sections, and lots of organic. Upmarket, definitely expensive, but a best company year over year, and very, 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 very successful over time. One of the things they have there is a salary disclosure report. And the salary disclosure report is a document that sits on their servers that anyone in the organization can get to. Any one of their 30,000 plus, 40 now, 1,000 plus employees across the country can access the salary disclosure report. And what it is it reads like a phone book and documents to the dollar to the name exactly what everyone in the organization made the salary year prior to any given time. So right now, anyone in the organization can open the salary disclosure report and see to the dollar, to the name, what everyone makes in the organization, across the organization, right? Not just salary band, not just salary band to department or to role, but literally to the dollar, to the name, full transparency, up and down the organization, from the frontline stocker all the way through John Chambers, the CEO. That's the wrong CEO. John Mackey, the CEO. So full transparency. But what's interesting about this, why it really reinforces bravery, I think, is how it was first established. There was a store manager in one of their Texas stores that couldn't quiet the constant buzz and din about some discontent around salary and around pay. And someone in the store had gotten wind of what someone else had made, and it started a dialogue, an undercurrent, a quiet hush around fairness. And it was very distracting, and this store manager could not shut it up. And no matter what she said, no matter how she addressed it, it was starting to bubble, and it was only getting worse. So the problem was that she knew that people in the organization and at her store were paid fairly, right? I mean, everyone wants to get paid more. No one thinks they're paid enough. But in organizations that have a high level of trust, people in them believe they're paid fairly for the work they do. It's not that they're paid enough, right? Everyone wants more and believes that they could probably get more. But the question is whether, when we're talking about building trust, is whether or not I'm paid fairly for the work they do. And this is not something that she could convey to people in her store. So in one last-ditch effort to quiet the hush so people could focus on their work, she shared the salaries across the team. Literally just opened the book and sent it to everybody and had a meeting about it and said, here's what everybody makes. Now can we please move on? Now can we please get to our work at hand? And sure enough, in taking a very, very big chance, an obviously very big chance, without going to the higher-ups, without clearing it across the seniority of the organization, she shared to the dollar, to the name, what people made in the store. And because it was a high-trust environment to begin with, and because people believed or wanted to believe that people were paid fairly, they got a look at it and they moved on. End of story. It didn't create endless dialogue. It didn't create strife and stress. It didn't create jealousy and discontent. It allowed people to close the book and to move on and get their work done. So that was such a show of bravery, and incidentally, it worked. So when the regional manager got wind of what her store manager was doing in the field, she too decided that this was something that should be institutionalized at least across her region. So this store manager then implemented it across the region, and over time, regional manager after regional manager, this thing caught on. And now it's an enterprise-wide practice called the Salary Disclosure Report. Interesting story. And certainly embodies and speaks to bravery as an organizational characteristic. Whole Foods Salary Disclosure Report is one. Griffin Hospital, Griffin CEO Patrick Charmel, an amazing story of bravery to tell. And I'm not telling these stories just to tell them. When I talked about those behaviors of mentoring, the letting go, the managing the team, letting the team make decisions, think about the Whole Foods piece, and then think about the coach-mentor mentality. Okay? And think about everything I'm telling you through the lens of the coach-mentor mentality. Griffin Hospital, again, a relatively small hospital with just over 1,000 employees in Darby, Connecticut, 100 best company to work for, as is Whole Foods, happens to be the location where the 5th anthrax victim in 2001 was admitted. Her name was Adelie Lundgren. She was 94 years old, and in fact, she passed away, and it was the anthrax that killed her. But the story behind this is a very interesting one. You'll remember how fear was so prevalent in late 2001 after the attacks of 9/11, and for how long people were on pins and needles. And you'll remember how people looked up when planes crossed skylines, and how crazy we got around white powder and anything that looked like it could be the next attack, right? Everyone in the country, in the world, was just heightened and so fearful of what was happening next. So sure enough, when Adelie Lundgren was admitted and they were able to ascertain that it was anthrax poisoning, the FBI swarmed Griffin Hospital and brought the board of directors and the leadership into a room and had them promise that they wouldn't tell anyone that what was going on. So they didn't want to create scare, basically. So they promised that no one would know other than the admitting team and the family of Adelie Lundgren. And basically they quarantined, that's not the right word, but they quarantined the information. And that's not the right word, forgive me, and I can't think of the word I'm trying to use. But they tried to keep the information in the room. The problem was, at Griffin Hospital, they spent so much time and energy over time building a high-trust environment that they didn't want to. They wanted to share it with hospital staff so they could tell their families and know that there was potential problem within the hospital. And they believed that by not telling them, they were putting them more at risk than they already were. No one knew quite what the properties of this anthrax poisoning was quite yet. They didn't know how contagious it was, how widespread it was, but they believed that their staff had to know. But the FBI had told the board that if they didn't sequester, if that information got out and they sequestered the information, and if it did get out, they would in fact be breaking the law, and they would be putting themselves and their families at risk of arrest if they were to tell and share information. But the leaders there felt it so important to share that they put themselves at risk and believed that they could trust people with the information and it wouldn't get beyond the people they needed to tell. So they told their 1,000 employees, asking them to keep the information within the context of their immediate families and to not go to press and to not go to friends and to not tell distant relatives, but just keep it as secure as need be so that it doesn't get beyond the hospital. So long story short, they did share the information. No one got arrested, and sure enough, staff did keep the information within the context and within the confines of the hospital. But that's a story they're able to tell now, a story of bravery that Patrick Charmel and the board made a decision based on what they believed to be the right thing to do for the betterment of the organization and or the people in it. Yep, a great story of bravery. Now, our last characteristic we're going to talk about is kindness, one that exhibits and can receive empathy and compassion and integrates the needs of the business with the needs of team members and colleagues. And I want to talk about Amex again. We already did before, but Amex is an interesting story. Amex agreed to train their people in something called forgiveness training, and they worked with the Stanford Forgiveness Project through the Stanford University Disease Prevention Department. And as they trained their people, an amazing thing happened. They first worked with a pilot. They worked with 3 vice presidents and 13 financial advisors for a year of training in emotional competence, stress management, and forgiveness. And results were really quite compelling. At the end of the year, stress levels fell 25% on this team. A test measuring positive feelings rose 20%. And sales, here's the most interesting piece perhaps, sales on this team grew year to year 18% compared with the rest of the department's 11%, right? So it's actually a very large department, a couple of thousand people in it. And the control group, the group that wasn't trained for the year, saw a year-to-year increase of 11% in their sales. It's a sales organization. But sales on this test group grew 18% year to year. This is an approximate 70% difference in results, hard dollars amounts. If the 11% year-to-year increase for the control group represented $10 million, then our forgiveness group returned approximately $17 million in difference, a huge difference over time. Why is this around kindness? Because leaders at American Express recognized that the group was stressed out. They recognized that they were coming apart at the seams. And they recognized that although they had been successful and were continuing to be successful, they were putting relationships at risk. And they forgot about the how. They forgot about each other. And they got so numbers-driven and so focused and so targeted on making numbers that they forgot how to do it without putting their relationships at risk. And they were stressed out beyond belief. So there was churn and burn. There was turnover. There was discontent. There were low levels of satisfaction. There were low levels of engagement. So in order to speak to some of that, rather than just kind of go through standard protocol about how to deal with lack of engagement, they introduced something called forgiveness training. And in fact, it worked. Okay? American Express is a great example, as is Men's Warehouse. People are treated at Men's Warehouse with kindness, and that's all there is to it. We all know George Zimmer. George Zimmer is the personality that we see in the commercials. That actually is George Zimmer up there, who tells us that we're going to like the way we look, and he guarantees it. That is George Zimmer, and he himself is a recovering alcoholic and believes that everyone deserves a second chance. And that is how the culture has grown out of this philosophy that everyone deserves a second chance. So think about it. If you're going to go out and say that everyone deserves a second chance, you've got to design a culture that supports that belief. And one way they do this is by instituting a policy where no one is asked to submit a background check. No one is asked to submit a background check. And, it's a little thing, right? It's a simple thing. It's a simple thing. But if you think about how important it is to be consistent with what you say you're going to be. If you're in an organization that believes that everyone deserves a second chance, and you ask people to submit to background checks, a very common practice, a widely accepted practice, and a highly useful practice, but if it's inconsistent with your values, then it's something that can erode trust. So Men's Warehouse, not surprisingly, 100 Best Company to Work For, recognizes the connection between what we do and who we are, or transcends the what with the how. Do they need to be careful with who they bring on board? Do they need to hire carefully? Do they need to have an interview process that ensures that they hire people that align with their values? Yes, that's the what. The how addresses things like the values, right? With all the things being true of how important it is to bring and hire people into the organization, they recognize that everyone deserves a second chance, therefore wiped background checks from the slate. At Men's Warehouse, you're also given a second chance, or you may be given a second chance if you're caught stealing from the company. This is an incredible thing. This doesn't exist in many organizations. But at Men's Warehouse, if you are caught stealing from the organization, you may in fact be given a second chance. And there's one story that's very popular, and of course these stories get told over and over and over again inside these organizations. They're very good at telling stories of building and reinforcing culture. One gentleman in the store in Oakland, where they're headquartered, got caught stealing. And there was a relatively new manager in place, and this new manager caught this person stealing, and like anyone else on the call, made an immediate decision to terminate the employee. And of course that makes sense. They were caught stealing red-handed. So George Zimmer stays very close to operations and was in Oakland at the time and heard about the termination and decided to get a little bit more information and learned that although the person did steal, they stole because they wanted to look better at work. They stole this suit, or were trying to steal the suit, because they wanted to feel better about themselves and represent the store and the image of the store to the best of their ability. And at that point in time, couldn't afford the new suit. So what was important there is that they didn't steal for profit. They didn't steal to trade it for a great stereo. They didn't steal to even give it away. They stole to build the image of the store, right? To really align with the store's image to the best of their ability. So it was a relatively new employee. That new employee didn't know about all the ways that they can wear samples and borrow over time and do layovers. They didn't know about all this stuff just yet. It was a relatively new manager who acted swiftly in terminating the employee. And again, this is another example of what to how, right? Do they condone stealing at Men's Warehouse? Of course not. Of course not. Is it the Wild West there where people just steal ad lib wherever they want, whatever they want? Of course not. But they recognize that in living the values and walking the talk, they've got to think not simply about what to do, but how to do it. We don't want to encourage stealing, but how are we going to manage it in a way that supports our values and who we are, right? And think about that through the coach-mentor lens. Thinking about, again, moving from what to how, right? Moving from a micromanaged results orientation to a wider lens culture support coach-mentor application. Okay, so George Zimmer reached out to the store manager. Together, they made a decision so that George Zimmer didn't come in and swoop and reverse the decision and cut the manager off at the knees. But together, they made a decision to reach out to the employee and bring them back in and explain what they could be doing next in terms of borrowing, using samples, et cetera, what they could do to not have to steal, but can. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because a question just came in and I want to address it. But wow, I think I made my point. So the last additional context I want to offer here is that, and it's an interesting data point. At Men's Warehouse, in an industry where shrinkage or employee theft is 1.4%, Men's Warehouse experiences 0.5%. And this is of overall sales. This is of total revenue. Men's Warehouse experiences 0.5% of the total revenue, where across the industry the average is 1.5%. So the very fact that they've built a culture around forgiveness and of kindness, and it will allow people will extend themselves to people so fully, leads to their enjoying 1/3 that of the theft than their industry peers and competitors experience, even though, or perhaps specifically because, they forgive it based under certain circumstances when it happens. Very different approach and very, very interesting, I hope, to you. So I want to get to this question. How do you hold people accountable for their actions while adhering to these principles? And it's a very good question, and of course, I think some of these examples maybe speak to some of that. What I'll add is that in great companies, and I mentioned this before, in all the companies that I've mentioned, there is some measurement that sits along the business results, right? So companies that are measuring not simply what people achieve, but also how they achieve it. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this is moving beyond the what and talking about the how. So at SC Johnson, for instance, who I mentioned briefly before, numbers speak for themselves. It's very easy on a balanced scorecard to see what revenue is, or what product brand strength is, or what customer retention is, because those numbers are calculated for you and crunched. It's harder to see how a person is getting it done, how they're adhering to the organizational principles, to the values, to the core values, to these 5 attributes, unless you measure it. And great companies, sure enough, are measuring it, and they do it in formal and informal ways. One is they'll talk with employees about their experience of management, and performance reviews for managers will include this idea of how they're interacting with staff, the relationships they're building. And there'll be some hard data like retention and engagement. So, the higher an engagement level, or the higher an engagement level, or the higher level of trust on a team, that's an immediate reflection on the way that manager is interacting, developing, and supporting that team. Retention is another factor. Now, people are experiencing record level retention right now, and it's not necessarily a fair indicator of how they're interacting with their staff, because people are concerned and more afraid to leave jobs now. More concerned than ever, right, for obvious reasons. But they're looking at multiple data points. But overall, what I'll say is there are a number of organizations out there that look significantly at how they do it. At SC Johnson, for instance, 40% of the overall scorecard is driven by not what the manager achieves, but how they achieve it. Now, they measure how in some specific ways: focus groups, retention levels, engagement levels, and 360s. Okay? Adobe is another great example. Adobe measures overall scorecard is actually 50-50. 50% of an overall review, performance review for a manager, is what I achieve, specifically driven by my numbers, whatever those key performance indicators are for that management team or that manager. And the other half, literally half of what you're holding me accountable for at Adobe, is how I get it done. And again, that's measured informally through focus groups and dialogue, but it's also measured formally through performance evaluation processes that include 360s and things of the like. Michelle, I hope that answers your question. If it didn't, you can always talk with me offline. So we are approaching our 5-minute mark, and I want to end, before I open it up to questions, with a quote. And I forgive the formatting. It looks like in the transition we lost a little bit of this paragraph. But this is from Bill George, who I mentioned before, the retired CEO who's now over at Harvard Business School teaching business. We are all spiritual We are all spiritual beings, George says, composed of minds, bodies, and a spiritual side. To unleash the capability of the individual, mind, body, and spirit, gives enormous power to the organization to devote their entire beings to the ultimate purpose for which the organization exists, which is to serve others. Yeah. So I spent 55 minutes talking about it, parsing it out, and Bill George said it in 2 well-framed sentences. But with that, I want to open it up to questions. And before I do, just say thank you for listening to me chat along for 55 minutes. I appreciate that. It's hard to stay engaged for 55 minutes live and in person, let alone on a webcast. So thank you for staying with me. And with that, you can enter your questions in the chat line, and I'll pick them up and answer them live. Or if nothing comes in the next 30 or 40 seconds, we'll just kind of wrap a couple minutes early.
Yeah, so everyone go ahead. If you do have any questions at this time, or something that you thought of earlier that now you think is a more appropriate time to ask, go ahead and chat those into the chat feature. And while you're maybe thinking of those questions, I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of the end of the call. I know that we did just have a question come in from Aaron, but after Hal is done answering that, if you do have any additional interest in ReadyTalk or hearing more about us, because we're going to run right up to the end of the hour, I believe, just type yes into the chat feature, and we will definitely be sure to follow up with you this afternoon or first thing tomorrow if you have questions about our service, our products, and the like. So on that, Hal, why don't you go ahead and answer Aaron's question?
Yeah, it's a great question, Aaron, and I'll read it. It's how do you assure quality performance while allowing your team to figure things out by themselves and trying not to micromanage? Let me read it one more time. How do you assure quality performance while allowing your team to figure things out by themselves and trying not to micromanage? It's a very good question, and I took it back a couple of slides to the bravery slide. And you know, it's somewhere along the line you're going to have to take a chance. Somewhere along the line you're going to have to say, I've got the right people in place, I've positioned them to be successful, and I'm going to start cutting them loose. And somewhere along the line, as a standout leader, as one that differentiates yourself from the solid leaders around you, right? Again, good to great. Good to great is never easy. Crappy to good is pretty easy. Good to great is tough. One, because good works just fine, thank you very much. And two, because it becomes about nuance and subtlety. It's no longer a rule book, right? But bravery takes willingness to take risk based on data and personal belief for the betterment of the organization and or the people in it, right? So if you believe you're doing the right things and pointing your team in the right direction, if you believe that you've selected your team well and you've managed them and developed them to your best of your ability, then you've got to start somewhere. And it may be just a small little piece where you can let them go and see what happens. It may be that you can engage them and ask that question and say, I'm trying to develop myself here in some ways. I recognize that perhaps with a little less control, we might even see more exciting things come out of this team. What would that look like, right? Remember, you don't have to have all the answers. And even the question itself of how do I set them off and let them be successful in different ways, even that question might be better answered by them than by you. I hope I got to your question. So we're going to have time for one more question here, so we honor your time. And I'm going to read the next one that came in just in order as they came in. I believe you are exploring, this is from Melanie, thank you Melanie, I believe you are exploring the next growth leap management style. However, one of the questions asked always is how does this benefit shareholders? Are there analogies supporting data on returns? Yes. Okay, well let me just give you this quickly. And then I'll point you to a reference because I don't have it. It's obviously not in the presentation, but I want you to be able to put your hands on exactly what it is. The organizations that I mentioned that best embody great leadership are organizations that have been recognized, and this won't be a surprise, as best companies to work. And what I can tell you is that across the Fortune 100 best companies to work for, the publicly held companies where you can actually manage return on investment outperform industry peers and competitors across all indices, right, and key performance indicators by, depending on the year, about 3 to 6 times, right? Return on investment, not overall returns obviously, but return on investment. Return on investment within best companies to work see a return on investment of 3 to 6 times, depending on the year, that of their industry peers. And it won't surprise you, I think, that the tougher the times, the deeper the recession, or the more at risk the economy, the wider the variance. Because great companies that have people in them that exhibit this type of behavior with the most consistency show up even greater in times of trouble and in times of strife. And great companies and great leaders see no greater test than where uncertainty is at its greatest and where risk is at its most, right? And I'm sure you can follow me there. So what I'll tell you to go for numbers and not just take it from me, but to go for the specific numbers that'll break down what that return on investment actually is, go to greatplacetowork.com. That's the site from Great Place to Work Institute. and within a couple of clicks, you'll get to the business results of 100 best companies to work for. Those are the publicly traded 100 best. There's about 50 any given year. And they will show you year over year what the return on that group is relative to their industry peers on overall return on investment. I can also tell you to go to business ethics and look at the return on investment from the corporate social responsibility group, because there's a lot of overlap there. And an overall corporate social responsibility, I believe, is a direct indicator of the self-awareness that you see in organizations, the bravery and the kindness that you see in organizations. So many of the companies that I mentioned are in both indices, but they'll give you 2 different data points to prove the point out. Thanks, Melanie. Simone, are we?
I do see we do have another question here. If you want to grab it quick, you're more than welcome to, or if you'd like to.
Sure. But so before I do this, I will address the question, but we're a couple of minutes after the hour. I will say that anyone that needs to drop off, please do, and connect with me offline. My contact information is at the back of the presentation. I'll also say, in case we don't have time at the very end, that there'll be an opportunity to provide feedback, and I would so appreciate any feedback that can help me think differently about how these are presented is useful. I get to present a fair amount with ReadyTalk, and the more feedback I get about how it's working for you and how the tool works for you, the more I can look at content critically, and the more ReadyTalk can look at the platform critically. So please take the opportunity to spend a second or so with that feedback at the end if you can. So before I go then, Donna, you ask, how do you bring this down to a small scale employee base with 5 or less employees when each component is so critical? What I think is that outside of a few things that I mentioned in terms of case studies, this is all scalable because it starts with one-on-one. So what I would encourage you to think about, and how you formalize or institutionalize is a little bit different than how you think about it. And I don't know which one you're asking about. I don't know if you're asking how you bring this or how you formalize something in an organization as small as that. So let me address how you can think about it, because it starts with you. And I would encourage you to think about it not 1 to 5 or 1 to 50 or 1 to 500, but 1 to 1, 1 to 1. And I would say that every opportunity, every interaction that you have with, and I'm really talking about one person at a time, is an opportunity to build trust. And right at the heart of everything we're talking about here lies trust. Trust, trust, trust. Right? When you're looking for a house, it's location, location, location. When you're thinking about your business and relationships, it's trust, trust, trust. Everything we're talking about revolves around trust. And trust is incredibly difficult to build, and the most unfair piece of that is that it's incredibly easy to break. So you've got to consider and think about every single interaction that you have with every single person, up an escalator, in an elevator, in an email, on a voicemail, in an interaction within a team, one-on-one, walking down the hall, as you cross and make eye contact in the hall, you've got to think as every interaction as an opportunity to build trust. And the way to build the components that we're talking about is not you to the organization, but you to another person. And if this stuff misses the one-on-one, the 1 to 1, then it'll never stick to the organization. You can't go 1 to 1,000 or 1 to 20. It's 1 to 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 1. And once it goes beyond 1 to 1, you have an exponential factor, because then it's 2 to 2, then it's 4 to 4, then it's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that's as direct an answer as you'd like, but it's the best one I can come up with within 3 minutes, as we're running late for the presentation.
No problem. Again, Dan, if you do want further follow-up from Hal, and put up his contact information here on the last slide. Again, we just want to say thank you to everybody that jumped on the call today and was able to join us. You will again be receiving the recording of this presentation, so if you did miss anything, there will be that, as well as the slides that Hal did present today as well. Those will be sent out later this afternoon. If you do have any additional questions about ReadyTalk in general or specifically, feel free to type yes into the chat feature there, again at the lower left-hand portion of your screen, and we'll be sure to follow up with you as soon as possible, since unfortunately we didn't get a chance to answer maybe any of those questions. But we would love for you to come back to some more of our web seminar series events. And again, up on the slide in front of you is our ReadyTalk web seminar series site. So check out those new ones. Our new events for November will be posted in the next week or so, and our newsletter will be going out as well. So thanks again for jumping on the call with us. Thanks, Hal, for joining us again and presenting your information. And look for Hal again next month actually too, as he's joining us with another presentation, as he briefly mentioned the topic of meditation. So on that note, I'm going to end the call, and I hope you guys all have a great afternoon.